We have this terrible reputation of we just can't change. And in the last 18 months, we have changed and changed and changed and changed. This is the new normal, the way higher ed has to be, because it's not going to be the same as it was. And we don't actually know what it's going to look like moving forward. And we're going to have to learn and adapt, and we're going to have to do it quickly.
Welcome to In Your Element, a podcast on the Enrollify Podcast Network and brought to you by Element 451, an advanced student engagement CRM providing higher ed institutions with a competitive admissions advantage from recruitment to enrollment through the use of AI. On each show, we ask 5 questions about current challenges, exciting opportunities, and what's next in higher education. I'm your host, Eric Stoller, and on today's show, we have Melanie Gottlieb, Interim Executive Director of AACRAO, the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. AACRAO is a nonprofit, voluntary professional association of more than 11,000 higher education professionals who represent approximately 2,600 institutions in more than 40 countries. And Melanie, she's had pretty much all the types of AACRAO roles in her career.
So I started my career as an assistant in the registrar's office. That was my first higher ed job, and worked my way into becoming registrar. I moved across the country and then became an international credential evaluator, director of admissions, director of admissions operations, did undergraduate and graduate admissions, and then a VPEM. And through all of that, AACRAO was the professional association that taught me how to do my job and gave me my professional network. I sort of grew up as a professional in the association.
And then in 2021, Melanie was named Interim Executive Director. At AACRAO, she leads an organization that focuses on multiple areas in higher ed, from an enrollment and retention standpoint, all the way through graduation.
We are the professional association home for people across the enrollment cycle. And so we take care of helping students come into higher education. We take care of them while they are in higher education from an enrollment and retention standpoint, from a records standpoint. Our members also are the sort of guardians and caretakers of the data and the curriculum. And then we help get them graduated. So that's the umbrella of our...
Wow, that's a huge... you've got the beginning and the end and some stuff in the middle. I just love that registrars handle graduation. It's sort of an interesting sort of niche for an office that, it's like one of the most exciting events for any institution. And my apologies to all my registrar friends, but it's not the most exciting office. Melanie's going to say nothing to that effect. She's going to say the registrars are the most exciting segment of the AACRAO family. But it leads me to my first real question here is, what are the challenges facing today's enrollment management professionals? Obviously, registrars too are included in that question.
So the challenges facing higher ed professionals in general, and enrollment and records and academic services folks specifically look a lot like the challenges facing all of the employment areas right now. We are still in a pandemic. And I have to say that the pandemic has infiltrated every aspect of their roles. We started doing these things called coffee breaks at the beginning of the pandemic, where on Friday afternoons at 3:00, we would have these informal conversations where they're webinars, but no slides, no PowerPoint, really just talking about what's happening, what are you doing about X, Y, or Z challenge. And a lot of things have emerged from those conversations. First challenge really is just about reinventing their jobs every day. Early in the pandemic, I would talk to folks and on Monday, they would be faced with a set of problems. We have to do this thing differently than we've ever done it before. How are we going to do it? By Wednesday, they'd have a plan. Okay, this is how we're going to do it. By Friday, that plan had probably been tossed out the window. Yeah. And they'd done a complete 180 because there was some new information or some new factor. And it was this endless churn of reinventing their roles. And that was, I think, much more focused on the registrar group earlier in the pandemic. They had to move all the classes online. They had to rethink schedules. They had to come up with a way to deal with graduation, which is like this big benchmark thing that the institution celebrates and the individual celebrates and families celebrate. All of that pressure was on them. By the time that was over, not that their pressure got less, but I think the enrollment management and admissions pressure got worse. You're looking at a whole bunch of folks who expected to have a particular job. So you think about your admissions road warriors and the people who are leading them. They expected to have a particular job.
Face-to-face, going to events and fairs.
Yeah, counselors do that job because they're really good at connecting with students face-to-face. And if you've ever been on a webinar where everyone has their cameras off and they're trying to recruit and read the room and get a sense and connect with people, and they're yelling into a void. I mean, they really just,
hard. Yeah.
They're getting nothing back. And so those jobs were all different, not jobs that maybe they would have signed up for. And so leading those people were really challenging. I talked to admissions directors and VPs of EM who said, every week I have someone in my office multiple times, and in my office, meaning in my virtual office on a Zoom call, crying because just the challenges that they were facing in the job, not to even mention the personal stuff. You're trying to work full-time through a pandemic and you've got whatever you've got on your personal side. So all of those pressures were just incredible. I think that the enrollment management teams and the admissions teams really went through something that was career shattering in a lot of ways. And everyone has been pretty raw. And I don't think that we've come out of that really. We're coming back to campuses this fall, and I'm seeing people talking about move-in, and we're all hoping that it's going to go really well.
Exactly.
But we don't know. And that's just the immediate challenges. We started the pandemic with a whole lot of challenges facing the profession. We started the pandemic with a looming enrollment cliff, and that hasn't changed. We're maybe not as focused on it right now because we're dealing with the immediate fire of how do we continue to enroll students? How do we continue to provide a quality experience? How do we continue to find the right students for our institutions? But we've got this enrollment cliff coming as well. And the pandemic has meant that already tight budgets have been slashed. And we're doing more with less, and often with less people, because the whole field and really everyone's experiencing staffing challenges. We can't hire enough people.
So it's interesting. How hard is it for institutions to find people right now, especially sort of maybe those entry level positions that have completely changed the scope and sort of the meaning of those roles?
Yeah, I think the field in general is going through this massive redefining of roles and responsibilities, and entry-level professionals are really hard to find. The admissions pipeline, which has traditionally been, you've got your student workers who are your orientation leaders and your admissions tour guides, and you've got this really incredibly robust way to get people excited about working for your institution. And these are your best people to come into these roles and to get people excited, and they can talk about your institution in the most rich way. That pipeline broke this year. And those roles are going to be harder and harder to fill until we sort of get back to whatever and I don't even want to say back, because it's really not going to be back. It's going to be a newly defined normal.
A new sense of kind of going forward. So now that everyone is, we've kind of hit the doom and gloom a little bit. How do things get better? What is the road ahead?
Yeah, I think I will say that we've done an amazing job That's what I have come out of the pandemic, talking to people regularly. I've been unbelievably impressed by how our professionals have bent over backwards, reinvented their jobs, dedicated themselves to their institutions and frankly to their students. The people who are in our roles, people who work in higher ed, administration and higher ed professionals, they do it because they love it. They do it because they're really committed to education as a really powerful force for good in people's lives. And they're dedicated to their students being successful. That's why graduation is so important, and registrars do it, because this is the culmination of 4 years of work for the students, but also for the people who help them along the way. And they celebrate that. They're in it for those feels. It's about making students successful and seeing that positive change in students growing and learning. And so it is going to get better. I think it's going to get better only because of the dedication of those in the field who are continuing to work it forward and figure out how we move forward and how we change and grow. One really other thing that's been hopeful is that higher education as a profession is notoriously slow to change. We are known.
No, come on now. We can't say that.
No, really, we have this terrible reputation of we just can't change. And in the last 18 months, we have changed and changed and changed and changed. We've changed the way we work. We've changed the way we approach problems. We have become much more agile in our approach to problem solving and to innovation. And what I am hopeful for is that those change mechanisms that we had to adopt on the fly are going to inform the new normal and the new way forward, and that we're going to be able to work differently, cross-functionally, collaboratively, and quickly in ways that we never have before and had to during this pandemic. So I think that's the positive coming out of the pandemic, is that we've experienced this process of adaptive change, and perhaps we will build that into our structures moving forward. And that's the message I've been giving to our folks, is that this is the new normal. Yeah. And this is the way higher ed has to be, because it's not going to be the same as it was. And we don't actually know what it's going to look like moving forward. And we're going to have to learn and adapt, and we're going to have to do it quickly.
I keep thinking about the phrase professional resiliency and how that's kind of emerged as something that, if you hire the right people, they can handle the circumstances that are put, in front of them. And that's clearly been demonstrated by plenty of enrollment management teams, admissions teams, registrars. I mean, I've heard stories of registrars taking home documents and having it out on their kitchen table and trying to sort of sort out things, because there's a physical element to this. They can't just go all digital. They have a lot of actual paper-based things too.
Yes, that actually is something that AACRAO is really focusing on. The ability to exchange, just the document piece, the ability to exchange documents digitally has been around for more than 30 years. The adoption rate in higher ed is pretty low, I would say.
It's higher ed is basically my dad at this point. My higher ed and my dad, there's some parallels there.
Maybe a few parallels. And it's because document exchange is not sexy, right?
Oh, it's super cool.
It's so low on the priority list for institutions. It's just not sexy. But in the end, this is a business continuity problem. We need to be able to do this. If you have to move operations offsite at a moment's notice, we can't be having transcript stations set up, registrars setting up shop on their dining room tables. And that is a real thing. That happened.
It's not just a myth. I mean, I heard someone on another episode that I recorded, they mentioned that, higher ed is effectively a technology business. if you're at a university or a college. And I think that your point illustrates that perfectly, that, like you said, these technologies have been around for a long time. Why hasn't higher ed, gotten to that place? And, it reminds me of sort of, that we've talked about the resilience of people and sort of persistence of people throughout the pandemic professionally. But there's also, kind of the operational stuff, obviously the paper-based things and the document stuff. But I was thinking about the analytics component, the data component. EM folks had all sorts of predictive models, pre-pandemic. Perhaps they tried to use them during the pandemic. But where does enrollment analytics fit into all this picture now?
I would say to the folks who are really good at data and analytics, and there are quite a few institutions that are have in the past done really great work there. People are scratching their heads because honestly, the models are broken. All of the predictive factors have changed. You've got test scores going out the window, with test optional being the norm, at least at the moment. The testing may or may not come back. But those models are broken. Student behavior is not so predictable right now. And because of the ways in which we work the admissions cycle and the admissions funnel, this is going to ripple for several years, the impact of what has changed during the pandemic. And so we were not able to connect last year with the juniors in the same way, or the sophomores in the same way. They've had different experiences as well, and they maybe want to do something different than you might have predicted, given that they've had these other life-changing experiences as well. Our young people have experienced enormous change in their social and academic lives. That's going to impact their decision-making moving forward and what they want out of their academic experiences moving forward. And so we have to look at new ways to do this. We're going to have to come up with predictive models that are a little bit more immediate to lay against these sort of long-term, longitudinal approaches to the way that these are models that work really well and have worked really well for a long time, but we're in a disruption mode. And those models are not going to be the same.
Speaking of changes, a lot of institutions, over the course of the pandemic that maybe had been thinking about going test optional, did. And, all of a sudden, institutions that were maybe at the forefront of doing some work around holistic admissions, that just kind of became the norm now. I mean, are we done with tests? How does holistic admissions fit into all this?
Holistic admissions has been around for a long time. It is a fairly labor-intensive process. Like, it just takes more inputs. But it has been, research in the past has shown that it does a really good job for a lot of institutions to deal with a lot of their enrollment challenges. One of the big concerns that we have moving forward out of the pandemic is that questions around equity have risen even higher on the list. We've seen during pandemic, any equity gaps at institutions have only increased. Students who were disadvantaged prior to the pandemic, students of color, underserved rural populations, lower income populations, those are the students during the pandemic that have had more challenges than sort of the mid-tier income students or the more traditional kinds of students. And it has been shown that using holistic approaches already does support better inclusion of those populations and more equity. And so I think as we move forward, those kinds of admission practices are going to be more prevalent across institutions. And I think AACRAO has lots of tools to help people learn the best approaches to moving forward with holistic admissions. And we've seen an uptick in interest in a lot of that, using our resources for those. I think it's a good thing, actually. I think test scores absolutely have a place. I don't know that testing is going to go away. It will be interesting to see what that place is and where that goes. I think as you think about the admissions funnel, there are a lot of institutions who get a lot of applications and have used test scores as a means to make the funnel a little smaller. You've got to get your application pool to a manageable size and there are cut scores. There have been cut scores. That's been a particular piece. I think that particular way of narrowing the funnel is starting to go away. And I don't know that that's a bad thing.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for that. I think it's really important to continue to sort of explore this topic as it's not going away, and I think it's maybe in the greater scheme of things, it's just a theme of change and disruption and evolution of higher ed in general. When you mentioned the some of this stuff has been around for quite a while, some of the technology stuff has been around for quite a while. Where do you see the role of ed tech in the future of college recruitment and admissions?
Well, ed tech has been at the forefront of college recruitment and admissions for a while now, and I think that, like everything else, the pandemic has absolutely accelerated the need for strong ed tech. I think that if an institution is not using effective technology and appropriate technology to reach their students, to analyze their data, to look at their pools, I think that those institutions are going to fall behind because it's going to get harder and harder to understand the marketplace and understand student learning if you don't have these tools in order to help you digest and make strategic decisions on how to allocate your resources. Resources are not going to increase in the near term for institutions. We know this. And with the challenges with the current pool and the current predictive models and the challenges of the upcoming enrollment cliff, institutions are going to have to get really smart about who they're looking for, who is the right fit for their institutions, and how they connect with those students, those potential learners. Students have a high use of technology, and they have a set of expectations around how technically savvy the institutions are going to be. These are students who are on their phones 24/7, and everything is immediately at their fingertips. They want to be able to talk to their counselors quickly. They want to be able to connect with people. They want to feel real connection. They don't want it to feel like it's canned. They have all of these expectations, and technology is going to help institutions to meet those needs and goals. It's not going anywhere. I think that institutions are going to have to invest carefully and wisely and train their people in order to use those tools effectively. This is going to be, I think, a bigger and bigger player in the management world.
Well, it makes me think about a couple of things. One is, historically there have been numerous, campuses around the country where they've invested in various technologies that sort of just sat there on a shelf, being kind of shiny and expensive. And the pandemic, I think, has really shown that can't be the case. And also, there's some of the federal funding opportunities that there's some potential there for investments. And I don't know if you've heard of any of your members, institutions who have looked at that, or if you've kind of shared that with your institutions around sort of, hey, if you're struggling with some budget and resources, perhaps there's a pool of funds there for you.
Yeah, we have, that hasn't been our major focus, but we have shared some of those opportunities for our institutions.
Nice. So bonus question. I always ask everyone sort of a final question. And I think this one, to me, it really hits well with sort of the overall focus of this episode is, what do you think higher education leaders need to be doing right now in order to ensure that their enrollment continues to thrive?
So I've got a couple of thoughts on that. First is, I think that enrollment leaders need to really pay attention to their people and take care of their people. I think that the higher ed enrollment umbrella that AACRAO is over, people are tired. They have had to work really hard and do more with less and reinvent their roles over and over for the last 18 months. And the people that are still there are all in. And institutions need to, and enrollment leaders need to find ways to make sure that their people are taking care of themselves, that they, have sort of appropriate mental health measures, that they are just being attentive to those particular needs, because we don't want to see massive burnout and a wave of really dedicated, really knowledgeable, really caring professionals leave the profession, because it will be hard to fill those roles moving forward. So that's I think, one of the first things. Part of that is we're going to have to figure out how we keep people upskilled on smaller budgets. We know at AACRAO that the first thing to go when institutional budgets get tight are professional development resources and networking resources. And it's that networking piece that is a piece of that mental health puzzle of keeping professionals sane. You've got to talk to other people who do what you do to get new ideas, to feel like
just camaraderie.
Understand. Yeah, it's a camaraderie, and it makes you feel like you're not alone in the void. And so that's really important. And we're trying to do our part by doing lots of free stuff, lots of stuff that people can join, even if you're not a member.
That's very generous, though, of an association, because that's typically not the kind of the model.
Yeah, it's not typically the model, but I would say that the leaders at AACRAO, we all come from the field. And so we really know how it feels to be in people's positions. And while, we have to keep the lights on and the doors open and keep doing the things we do. And so there's always going to be stuff that we're going to have to pay for. But we're trying to do as many free things as we possibly can just to keep people moving forward. And then I think enrollment leaders are going to have to really think about the way that they're moving forward with planning, with budgeting, with technology in a very open and agile way, because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what things are going to look like over the next 3 to 5 years. And it's really going to take higher ed probably that amount of time to recover as a sector, just in time for the enrollment cliff.
I feel like you just left us on a cliffhanger. I need to have them insert some dun, dun, dun.
But I think we just need to approach it in an open and innovative way and try to think a little bit out of the box. We can't continue on this mode of every institution has to grow at every moment. That's not where we can be. That's not we don't have those people. We're going to have enough students for every institution to continue to grow enrollment. So institutions have to really focus, and enrollment leaders need to help their institutions get to a place where they say, what do we do? Who do we serve? What do we do best? And let's focus on those things. Because if you focus on who you are and who you serve and how you help them be successful, you're going to come out the other side of this in a really good place. And institutions that are focusing on that, and enrollment leaders who are focusing on that, I think are going to find themselves in a better position than others who don't.
I think that's a really great place to end the show. Melanie Gottlieb, thank you so much for being on In Your Element.
Thanks so much, Eric. Take care.
That was Melanie Gottlieb, Interim Executive Director at AACRAO, which you can find at AACRAO.com. Thank you for listening to In Your Element, brought to you by Element 451 and part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. You can find more about the Element 451 Student Engagement CRM at element451.com. And if you like what you heard, please give us a rating and review, and follow along on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Eric Stoller, and we'll see you next time on In Your Element.